Good morning, everybody. Tigran here, excited to be with you. Fired up this morning to be joined by a special guest, fellow President's Council agent, top producer, 12-week year host for the GO, Andrew McReynolds, who is going to share with us his patented tax-free college funding concept. This is really a game changer, and so you really want to embrace the content. So this is the time to really gear up, grab a notepad, pen, and try to keep up. We're going to record this session, so we make sure that this could be replayed in ongoing curriculum, as well as kind of become part of the conversation within the GO. When you think about the dramatic rise in college education costs over the last decade, projected to happen in the next decade, this is something that's front and center. It's on the mind. I could tell it on my mind as a parent, and for many of your clients, prospects, this is a natural point of pivot in the planning process. So I've been very impressed with the way that Andrew presents this concept over the years. He's been instrumental in hosting study groups and sessions where this conversation has caught some momentum, and we felt compelled to really make this part of our 30 Minutes to Thrive curriculum. With that being said, before I turn it over to Andrew, let's all also make sure that we're paying attention. Today's the last day to get cases issued to be paid for by month end, account for any incentives or company programs and initiatives. So it's important that we're connected to NB21. We're communicating with our service teams, and we're making sure that there's no case left behind. Even if additional offers go in today, there could be a probability those get issued. So we don't want to back down from month end. We want to make it an unstoppable finish. This, you've heard me say, has been our best July in GO history. I attribute that to your efforts and your unwavering commitment to deliver on who we are and our mission to empower, motivate, and inspire our prospects and clients to make better financial decisions. And today's topic, tax-free college funding, is just going to be a natural extension of that. So all of that being said, again, excited to have Andrew McReynolds with me, top producer, certified financial planner, and again, host of our 12-week year initiative as a GO. So with that, Andrew, are you ready to go, my friend?
We are T-minus 30 seconds ready to go, but yeah, we can start it out with the PDF that we sent over. Do we have that trends in college pricing? We can start there.
Yeah, let me help you out there. Give me 1 second. I can probably dig that up if you guys bear with me.
Yeah, for whatever reason, Outlook keeps kicking me out for some reason.
Wouldn't be the first time, Andrew. Been in my life the last couple of weeks as we migrate to 365 here, but let's see if we can pull this up for you.
All right. Yeah, all I need is the, I guess, Brian, if you could forward over the, never mind, I got the Zoom here. It finally populated. All right, let me try this real quick. Okay. Should be good to go in 2 seconds.
And as Andrew pulls that up, we're going to be walking you through really the entire concept as far as the way it's presented. We're going to condense it today in a way that it's already been pre-populated. So this would be a whiteboard talk, but for the sake of making sure we get through the concept in the next 20 minutes and leave maybe a few minutes for questions, this whole presentation's been already populated by Andrew, but we're probably going to run past 9:30. So if you have anything to do right at 9:30, you could jump off. If not, we're going to probably need an additional 5 to 10 minutes to make sure we get through everything. It's worth your time, and I'd recommend you hang in there, but certainly want to be respectful of your time. So,
yeah. So I was gonna say, Tig, I'm in and good to go. I can share my screen, just making sure that everyone can see it. So if I share right now, just let me know if you're seeing it on your end.
Yep.
All right, perfect. All right, so picking it up for there. Thanks, Teague, for the info. Sorry for the technical issues. But yeah, so what's great about this process is really 90% of this is just like a plug and play. Like you guys can literally, Google, paint by numbers. It's a very, very simple concept up to a certain point. So I'm going to spend an inordinate amount of time on the part that requires a little bit more nuance to it. And then the rest of it, again, is pretty straightforward. So, yeah, the opportunity that exists in college planning is pretty, fantastic. It's a market that, anybody that has kids, anybody that has a family, they can be high net worth, mid-range, what have you. It's a very, very overlooked area. And it's an area where, if you do this correctly, you can save families hundreds of thousands of dollars and also write, pretty significant cases for yourself. So step number one on this is what I always show clients is trends in college pricing. Trends in college pricing is literally something that you can Google. Looks like this. So you can literally just Google trends in college pricing. It's done by the College Board. It says it here in the beginning, but basically what the College Board does is they grab all of the data for all of the cost of college across the country. They do it every single year. So this one, I was using a prior 2016. Again, I'll see if, okay, cool, it's popping up. All right, so yeah, so they do it every single year, and it breaks it down into 4 categories. The 4 categories, I'll zoom in a little for us here. So the four categories are a public 2-year, this is almost like a community college, public 4-year in-state, public 4-year out-of-state, and then private nonprofit 4-year. If you're taking notes, again, I'm going to bounce through this pretty fast and furious because we got a short window. But you start with page 10. So page 10 is where we show, is a lot more visual, kind of a nice graph for us. And it basically answers the question, okay, so how much does college on average cost today? If it's a private nonprofit 4-year, it's going to be about $36,000, $880 for tuition, $1,299 for, room and board, and then books and supplies and whatever in the end. If a lot of times in this process, you're going to get somebody that says, the 2 things that you really need from a parent to run all of this, by the way, is just, an approximation of what kind of school we want to aim at for the kids. The most common answer you're going to get is, hey, I want my son or daughter to go to, whatever school, whatever school that they can, right? As long as they can choose, that's great by me. Then the other is, sometimes you'll get people that have an alma mater or, hey, I want to keep the cost lower or whatever else. So anyway, you get some sort of feedback on the type of school that they want to go to. And then the next thing is all you need is the dates of birth of the kids. And you can literally run all of this. So just those 2 things. So if you're showing them this as the first thing, the thing that I kind of highlight in on as sort of a guiding conversation is typically this is not a bad number to aim at for the private nonprofit 4-year. Why is it not a bad number to aim at? Well, one, it covers the situation, sort of an ideal one, right, where they go to the best, possible school in that category. But the other thing is, if you take the 36,000 and you move it down into the other 2, categories, so basically, so it's going to cover all the tuition here. It's going to cover pretty much all of, public 4 years, certainly all of a public 4-year in-state, and certainly all of the community. So, and if they're in this category, you're already paying for your kid on a certain level, for room and board and some other things as they're with you. So this is a cost that parents can carry forward. So anyway, again, we just start here, touch on it real brief. You just go to page 10. Page 9 is our other most important one. And this answers the question of the inflation rate for school. So why is this important? Because this is what you're going to plug into the planning station. So you're going to use these numbers to plug into the planning station. So depending, again, what category somebody's in, you literally point to them and say, okay, well, we're aiming at a UCLA. So UCLA is in this private, nonprofit 4-year. So over the last, 2019, et cetera, 3.4, 3%, 3.3. So you're pulling from these numbers that you ultimately carry over to the planning station. Because the planning station, when we pop over to planning station, you're using this as inflation rates, right? So under general assumptions, you punch in your inflation rate. I'm using, in this instance, 2 different schools. I use UCLA, Arizona State. The other thing that I'll do for clients is I'll actually pull up UCLA, like just carry this off the website. What's nice now too is because we're doing Zoom meetings, you can literally Google UCLA tuition and fees and just show that to them in person. But yeah, it has it right there on their website. So now we've got our number. We've got 35,791. So again, just following the little bouncing ball here. We start out, we've got the overall cost of college as an average. We've got our inflation rate from the trends in college pricing, page 10, page 9. And now we're pulling in the real number of an example. Again, because we're dealing in an intangible, you want to make it as real as possible. I like UCLA as a default example. Why? Because 35,791 for a California in-state person, which is going to be most of the people you're talking to, just so happens to, line up quite well with the average cost of school, which was, so right in there. So that's 2016, 17. But yeah, so average cost of school right here. So you figure if you're using, right, so average cost for 4 years, 36,880, and UCLA is 35,791, right? So it's just right in the wheelhouse. And that again makes it more real. All right, cool. So if we go over to the next step, which is the planning station.
Hey, Andrew, and just to chime in, maybe we're going to say this, but you could actually pull up real-time tuition rates on planning station as well. Just want everybody to do that.
Yeah, correct. So I use eMoney, which has the same thing, right? So good point. Now you can actually punch into the program, the actual school, which is perfect. But again, it's always not a bad idea to show the fact that whenever you're bringing in any sort of like computer simulation, something, you want to like highlight where that came from. So showing them the actual cost of the school. But yeah, that's perfect. So you can punch it in, it'll bring it up for you automatically. Now, the other thing that we're doing here is we're using the inflation rate, we're punching in the tuition, and our goal is to really determine, okay, all right, what is our shortfall? So there's a transition point that's happening here. So you're hitting them with the fact that for, I think Armand and Jack in this situation, for them to go to school, it's 17, to hit that shortfall, it'd be 1707 a month to get there. So 20,481 every year over the next 12 years, or a lump sum of 176,000. So part of the function of this is to actually stir up a little bit of pain about the, about the goal here. The idea that they'd be doing this much, that they'd be setting aside, $176,000 as of today, and at the end of it, to their current assumption on things is all this money goes away. So it's like, yes, I know my kid's college is taken care of, but $176,000 is an awful lot of money, especially when you're talking about, 2 children. So you have 2 different kids that we're aiming at. One is, I think, 5 and 7 in this situation. So you keep this dollar amount in mind here. This is what you're going to be using to run for your custom. The lump sum, again, be 176. And here's the other important dollars, right? So you take the future dollars. So you say, okay, Armane, who's 5, UCLA is the target. We're going to need $225,000 by the time she's 18 to cover school. Jack, 2, going to Arizona State, party school there. He's needing $186,000 to get, cover the 4 years. So in total, we need $411,450. So the thing that's that you do want to, part of the process is you want to stir up enough pain where when when you're putting these things together, they understand that this is a particularly painful, topic. Trying to cover all this money is, a good amount of money, right? So we want to kind of lean on this a little bit, right? So when we get to this point, I usually, make it a little lighter in a sense of just saying, okay, so if you have, $176,000, you can write me the check today and we'll be done. So you just want to lean on the cost. You want to lean on the, premium there, or sorry, the amount being set aside is being pretty large. Because the solution that you're about to go into, if done correctly, ultimately, all of this money that we're setting aside for school, they can potentially keep. And this is the key transition point, and this is where you get into this little napkin talk here. And so fortunately, I was able to put this napkin talk together and put it into an actual kind of cheat sheet format. Teague, this is something we could send out to everybody on the call that gives you the language. So normally you're not going to have all the language kind of laid out across this whole thing. This is where I'm going to spend most of the time. I'll run through this real quick just so you understand what the language is, but we'll circle back on it because the other stuff to this point, I mean, anybody can punch those things into a planning station. Anybody can do the, trends in college pricing. You can pull up UCLA's numbers. All that stuff is pretty simple. Once we get to here is where kind of the nuance takes place. So I'll run through it, in the language that I would normally run through it. But again, we'll come back to this one just so that we can spend the most time here. Because the other stuff is also kind of like plug and play stuff. So this would be something too that, you can do as a napkin talk if you understand it well enough. You could even do this as, something that you pull out on a whiteboard in a meeting with any client that has kids. You could do this as sort of the teaser for the follow-up meeting as just a hypothetical, right? So here's the story, right? So we have family A and family B. And when I'm doing these, I always reference the name of the kids. So if it's Armene and Jack in this instance, let's just use Armene. So, so Mr. Mrs. Client, in this situation, we'll say family A, family B, we're going to do apples to apples. Let's just say, fast forward, Armene is 18 years old and she's going to school today. So in today's numbers, making it nice and round and easy for us, let's just say the school costs $30,000 a year. There's a little $30,000. We've set aside $120,000 for school, $120,000 for school. We're assuming 5% rate of return, 5% rate of return, and it's the classic, money over time. So, all right. So, and this is where the language comes in, right? So the key is we don't want to, follow the common mistakes that most families make. And that phrase is pretty important because you're framing what you're about to talk about right here. And it's very true. This is the common mistakes that most families make. What is the common mistakes? Cutting big checks to the university over the next 4 years. So you're freshman, sophomore, junior, senior, and the money's all gone. So, great job, going to a good school, all that positive stuff. But, downside, we're out $120,000 for school. So, obviously, not the best scenario in the world is any investment. If I came to you with an investment and, at the end of 4 years, the money's at zero, you wouldn't be too particularly happy, nor would you want to put any money into it. And that's actually a big problem with college planning is it's sort of this zero-sum game of if you're a dollar or two, you don't want to be a dollar or two over, you don't want to be a dollar or two under, and you're aiming at an impossible target because you have no idea what the cost of tuition is going to be or where your child is going to go to school until it's go time. So it's a very frustrating, very sort of imperfect process. And then you add into the fact that, again, you're going to be cutting the largest checks of your life to a university and the money's all gone. So that's family A, right? 120,000 set aside, big checks, and the money is all gone. And this is the classic, but what if there's a better way? So what if instead of cutting the big checks to the university, what if instead of doing that, we instead get a student-owned student loan and we buy ourselves some time? What's the value of time? Well, compounding interest over time obviously is incredibly important, but in this instance, just simply having $120,000, same as before, if we're earning 5% on that 120, over a 4.5 year period of how long that student loan is going to be, you're going to pick up $30,000 just from the float. You'll be at, 149,999,999, what have you. So even just starting there is the most simple thing. If we just followed that as a strategy, we would pick up $30,000 of gain that we don't have over here. So just out of the gate, you've made 30 grand. Now, part two of this is, well, what's the other factor with the student loan, right? So, and this is all kind of underneath here. So what's the other factor of the student loan? So the other factor of the student loan is, well, since I'm taking the student loan, I no longer have to, I have the ability rather to continue to fund my college plan, right? So since I'm not coming out of pocket for 4.5 years, I can continue to fund this all the way up for the next 4.5, really technically 5 with repayment programs and things. We can get into that in a minute, but just on that level. So, okay, if I continue to fund plus my gains, odds are over another 4.5 years, we're going to be, floating somewhere around 190, 200K, let's say, in this example, using the age that Armine is, this is about what it would be. So if we continue to fund and we have 190, 200 up here, pure apples to apples. And the reason why I include these two, by the way, is because it answers the question of the clients like, well, you funded more into the other one versus this one. So that way you have both examples, kind of in front of them. Pure apples to apples, not a single dollar more goes in. We're at 150, taking advantage of the fact that we don't have to come out of pocket for 4.5 years. We're up around 190, 200, right? And this is where I tell the client, so, you could probably see where this is going. So what's next? So now we have a $120,000 student loan, give or take. Maybe a student loan is going to cost us about $6,500 a year or so. Realistically, this number is actually going to be a lot less. Income repayment programs, there's a lot of programs where you don't even actually, you figure, especially income repayment, if the child is coming out of school, at the minimum over a rolling 12 months, they haven't worked for 6 of them. So even if they have a job, it's going to be very slight. So a lot of times they're literally paying $0 for the next 12 months after the loan starts, which is 6 months after they graduate. So sometimes you're at like 5.5 years plus before you ever come out of pocket. That being said, and there's a bunch of strategies, which actually we could do a follow-up on for student loans on kind of the back end here. But all that being said, let's just say we're doing straight line method. We're paying this thing down. So $6,500 a year is our student loan, right? So again, Mr. and Mrs. Client, you can see where this is going, right? So if we're making $6,500 a year, or rather the loan costs $6,500 a year, the gains on our 150,000, we still have that 5% is what? It's 7,500 a year. So if I'm gaining 7,500 a year on a 150, 10,000 on 190 to 200, and my loan only costs 6,500 per year, what is happening here? What's happening is I've covered all of college. I have all of my asset intact. And now I'm using arbitrage. I'm using leverage and leverage. I'm using the gains from my investment, money at work, to cover other people's money at work, which is the loan. And not only am I paying for all of school, but I'm also keeping this asset and ideally having it then carry forward into your retirement. And the beauty of this is over here, we want to aim perfect / low / I mean, there is no right target, right? The above below scenario either of them don't work. Here, we want to aim above. The amount that the more we're above on this target, the better. The more that you kind of, crush this loan on the back end, the better, the more money carries over, et cetera. So aiming a little high over here is definitely the to our benefit. Whereas here, again, you go low, you're short, you have an unbacked, liability. If you go over, you have penalties and whatever that you got to deal with for, an asset that you can't use anymore. So here's, and then the last little, things on this, this, 6,500 that we're paying every single year, a couple things. One, you're establishing, credit for your kid. So their credit score and what have you, loans being paid on time every single month. Not to mention the flexibility of payment options, not to mention there's a lot of forgiveness options that now exist on the loan where you pay a fraction of it. And, kind of the big sort of closing statement, if you will, that I always say is, so, all this is also assuming, in essence, a worst case scenario, right? We're assuming maximizing scholarship, we didn't get any scholarship, tuition assistance, and aid. We owed the full amount for school. We had to do it on a student loan. So that brings us to kind of the next slide, if you will, is depending where we fund is also what determines whether we maximize scholarship, tuition assistance, and aid. Are we on or off the FAFSA radar, right? So if we're on FAFSA radar, any money that we set aside for school ultimately is sort of shooting ourselves in the foot because we're showing the school, they'll ultimately see it on the radar. Anything that is off radar will maximize scholarship, tuition assistance, and aid. So then the next thing that I dive into here is FAFSA form. Again, we'll circle back on this conversation because this is where all the nuance is. But yeah, so real quick, popping over to FAFSA. All right, so FAFSA, if you're taking notes, you go all the way down to page 9 of the FAFSA form. Minor details on the FAFSA to understand is, when it comes to FAFSA, it's not even so much that you're applying for federal aid. Some people get sort of caught up on this, and there's some questions that came back for some people that were working on these. It's not the fact that you're applying for federal aid. It's what schools use to look at your finances. It's what schools use to look at a family's finances, what they use to look at the student's finances. And the most important section is this: investments include, investments also include, and then investments do not include. So investments include on the FAFSA, UGMA accounts, stocks, bonds, mutual funds, 529, Coverdale's, etc. Basically, if you want to think of it in a simple fashion, one, obviously anything that's earmarked directly for school is a no-brainer. They're going to, have you report that. The other thing is anything that's like liquid. So, right, we have stocks, stock options, blah, blah, blah. Anything that is sort of liquid and on radar that it could be used to say, hey, you've got $200,000 in cash, you could clearly use that to pay for your kid's college. The areas that now that we obviously care about the do not include: the home you live in, obviously our favorite here, the value of life insurance, ABLE accounts, retirement plans, pension funds, annuities, non-education IRAs, KIOs, etc. And then people also ask, well, what if I put a 529 in my grandparents' name, and that way it doesn't show up under me, or my kid. So on the positive, yes, it wouldn't for that moment, but here's what happens. So as soon as any money comes in from that 529 plan that is owned by someone other than you, that then gets reported as the distributions come in. So you're going to have a great, freshman year until they see the money, and then they're going to, bounce all of that scholarship, tuition assistance that you're getting. So, because you do these every year. So we want to be off radar as much as possible heading into, college. And this is major. I mean, these things all sort of start to combine together to, be pretty significant. And ABLE accounts, for those who are wondering, is like, I believe it's something to do with, it's like if you were, an individual whose family was affected by, military or, 9/11 or, something to that account. So ABLE accounts are super uncommon, and it's not something you apply for. You're people who are, affected by, something either military related or, what have you. So yeah. So now, again, bouncing all the way through, right? We've gone from our trends in college pricing, we got our, interest rate, et cetera. We punched it into this planning station. We've got our number over here, the 1707. We know our little napkin talk of, we don't want to do this, we want to do this. So now we show them this, right? Now we show them, okay, here's what this would actually look like. So again, we have our number from our 225, our 186 here. We've got the, FAFSA off radar. So this is where I'll pull in just the loan calculators, right? Again, you can run these on any number of things. I use this FinAid one. There's some updated ones that are actually even a little better that'll break down the monthly payment for you in an annual and all that. So anyway, we've got 225. I'm doing this on a 17-year. I'm doing this on a 13-year so that their age difference pays up at the same time. So this one, 186, et cetera. And then what I do is I show them an annual amount. The annual amount, I always do this and this is a little thing, you save on an annual, right? So if you do a monthly payment, generally it's going to be a little bit over, right, of what the annual is. Same with, on our policies or anything. If you pay a loan annually, you can usually pay a little bit less. So I'll always multiply this by 11 to get this annual number down here. And then combining those two, we have about 31,000. But it's important to separate it out because one kid's a little younger, one kid's a little older, and so we're adding this together, and you'll see that play out in the custom here. All right, so this is our custom. We're setting aside that same amount that that the client initially that we had lined up. And keep in mind that initial amount was like, oh, we're going to set aside this amount, and then we're going to lose all the money, right? So alternatively, if we've got this custom here, here's our 1707. And instead of having the money all go away at the end of that rainbow, let's see what we can do with 1707. So if we take that same 1707 as our target, and again, this is 2 kids, this isn't, too crazy here. All right, so we got 20 going in. We've got it going in on a, 17 pay because we have a 5-year-old and a, what have you is our kind of oldest there. At the end of that rainbow, we've got, 442. I always clean this up and I put it on a college. I do a supplemental illustration. And the way that you do this, guys, is you just do a supplemental and you just basically don't check any boxes. There might be one box you check, but you can see it cleans it up a lot. It just has the, contribution, and then it's just got the, payment on the back end. So we've got 429. Again, our first loan right there, 1518. Second kid goes to school, gets out of school. Now we're up to 31, paying that every single year. Everything is now paid off, 31,000. All our loans are paid off, up to this point. Client is now 65 years old. Client now has $453,000 left over in cash value that they get 30 grand on every single year, off and running, not to mention $1 million death benefit to their heirs, all while paying for all of school. And not to mention, this covers a whole lot of ancillary other stuff. What happens if Mr. and Mrs. Client dies on, their journey to ultimately cover their kids' education and take care of their family? They now have $1 million. It's a self-completing plan. What happens if they become disabled? New York Life jumps in and they pay that premium and that contribution for the duration of this contract, and then what happens if they make it? And then here again is sort of the fun part. What happens if they go to a less expensive school? We're aiming at the most expensive schools in the country as a target for this scenario. So what happens if one of them goes to a less expensive school? Answer is we have way more money. We pay everything down faster, all of the above. What happens if they get scholarship, tuition assistance, and aid? As we are designing them to get even better, this performs even better. And then what happens if they decide not to go to school and they say, you know what, I want to start a business, I want to be a YouTube influencer, whatever that is, now again, everything is just better. So, again, the point that I always kind of bring it back to is, Mr. and Mrs. Client, this is literally the worst case scenario. The worst case scenario, if you fund this the way that we have it laid out, the worst case scenario is that you end up keeping all the money at the end of this road. And every dollar that you're setting aside towards college, you pay for both kids' school, and keep all the money. And again, insure the ancillaries. You insure, knock on wood, if something happens to you, if you get disabled, if, you pass away, et cetera, et cetera. So, one other, I guess, last kind of sentence thing on this, that I usually tell clients or, tell prospects as I'm diving into college planning as like the intro conversation is, lots of folks do, retirement planning, we do retirement planning. In a great scenario in retirement planning and investment and strategy, you're doing a fantastic job if you can improve somebody's situation by, 2-3% on their, portfolio. And, there's a lot of good advice out there about retirement planning. There's a lot of stuff out there. You got your 401k, et cetera, et cetera. Interestingly enough, college planning is where I end up having, the largest savings and the biggest difference in my clients' financial future and their kids, not just for them, but also their children. So, the difference, if college planning is done correctly, is hundreds of thousands of dollars of difference. So whereas again, if I do investing a little bit better, can I outperform this? Sure. But where you make some of the most noticeable difference is in college planning. And so I use that as just sort of a teeing them up on the intro, and again, once you walk through this concept and once you have a strategy, you don't lean on product, you don't go too heavily out of 529, it's really, when you're doing this comparison here, it really is just things that are on FAFSA, things that are off FAFSA. A 529 does have the specifics, and this is an important detail, that $30,000 needs to be for year of tuition and expenses. You have to use it for year of tuition and expenses. They're like, well, what if I do a 529 and try to pay a loan, on the back end? It's like, well, you can't, unless you want 10% penalties and what have you. What's even interesting about this too, Teague, is, and I had this situation come up and explaining this to a client. He said, well, what if I feel like I could beat the rate of return on a custom, that custom whole life over a 15-year period. I'll just put it into index funds on the outside. Forget about, shooting yourself in the foot on the FAFSA, and then probably end up costing you the full cost of school anyway. But let's just say, FAFSA aside, let's run that scenario. So what if we put it into index funds, 15% on the back end? So I asked him, I was like, all right, what's a fair withdrawal rate on the index funds on the back end? He's like, okay, well, 4%, 4% is about right. He's like, okay, which is good. He actually was able to, guess that it was 4%. Yeah, most people say like, I don't know, 7, 8, 9, 10, something. But all right. So this was a scenario that I ran for this client, Brian Lee. We said, okay, let's compare a custom whole life to an index brokerage account. And I gave him 8% and 7%. And the other thing that's silly about that is, keep in mind, when you are investing for school, and you can pull up target funds for college on this, when you're investing for school, it's as if you're aiming, if you've got a 5-year-old, it's as if, you're somebody that's, 50, what have you. I guess I'll do it. If you're 8 years old, it's like you basically have somebody that's 55 aiming at a 65-year-old retirement date, because the time frame is so short. People think just because kids are young, like, oh, you go more aggressive, what have you. The reality of it, and they show this, by the way, on these, you can find these, if you just Google performance on target 529 funds, age-based 529 funds is what it is. It'll literally show you the portfolio mix shifting in the beginning from like 80% equities. And then as it gets closer and closer and closer, it's like 90% to 100% fixed assets, fixed incomes, which is like bonds, CDs. Like at that point, when you get closer and closer to college, you can functionally take on no risk whatsoever. So to assume, and by the way, the other last part of this, and I put this in the verbiage on this, and we can send this out too, Tig. I put this in the verbiage of this statement here. It basically says, for brokerage investing with index target income dates start at 15 years would be managed similar to a retirement date of 65 for a 50-year-old. So in an already lower risk profile, you'd be reduced as we got closer to quote unquote retirement, which also suffers from the problem of our highest risk returns would come in early years when the balances were the lowest. And our most conservative would come in the later years as we drew near retirement when balances were larger. So even though an 8%, and this is what's kind of crazy, when you take an 8% assumption, which there's no way we would get 8% during that window of time per what we're talking about, the average is closer to like 4 or 5. Let's give them 8%. So 8%, 17,000 a year at, 15 going in times 15 years, 8%, 462,000. Not to mention tax drag on brokerage accounts outside, but anyway, we're taking 4% of our distribution, 18,000. So what's the problem now that we moved outside of a tax favorable environment? Now we're getting beat up with cap gains. So any of the cap gains that we take, the net on this is 15,710 per year. But what's the other factor is like, it's not a smooth 15. I mean, the last 3 months is a great example of this. these draws, the buildup is 15 years. The payout on the back end could be another 15 to 12 to 17 or whatever you're paying at the back end. You are going to encounter significant market corrections. So you're exposing yourself to such a long timeline of draw. Forget about the fact that, again, net out the taxes, we're at 15,710 at 8%. And again, if you had the choice of removing market risk, removing tax risk, we don't even know if the cap gains are going to stay at 15%. Depending on your situation, it might pop up from there. So you're adding all these unnecessary variables to a situation that doesn't require it. Not to mention the liquidity factor as you're going on. You don't want to pull any money out of the brokerage account. Like right now, if the market's down, are you going to pull from your, index funds in the S&P? So anyway, we have this 15,757 net from our custom. At 8% after net taxes, we're at 15,710, 7%, 14, 6%, 13, and the more realistic 5% is 12. So even in the situation where you line this up just on a comparison to comparison, why? Because this is tax-free. We don't lose 15%. This is 5% draw on the back end comfortably. This is 4% very uncomfortably. So you don't even have a point of comparison on this. If we were even just doing it, forget about the fact that you're no longer on the FAFSA radar, and in his situation for 2 children. So you have 2 children, and then last thing I ended on these bullet points is life events happen. If you die, 800, 600, 800,000 of the family disabled, they'll pay it. So my closing thing on it is, so even if the numbers were not better for the custom whole life, which they are, the potential negative variables that are eliminated by the custom whole life would make the plan with the best options to cover the risk and flexibility that life tends to require, which is why so many people use these plans for college, and also why it's good to work with a planner, as what on the surface may feel correct, like a 529, when you get into a strategy conversation followed by more detailed numbers and analysis, it can end up costing you and the family hundreds of thousands of dollars. Take a look over the numbers and let me know what we missed, and we can reach out on Tuesday. So you can, this conversation, by the way, is probably not going to come up all that often, but it's nice to know that this planning methodology has been stress tested in every possible direction that you can think of. I've obviously show it to a ton of people. I have a ton of agents come back to me and say, well, when you said this about this part, so like every iteration of this and every little, nuance to it has been explored in great detail. So just rest assured that, if you can help people find this as a solution, you will save families hundreds of thousands of dollars. And you can lean on, obviously, if you're newer and you haven't done this or what have you, or you haven't had the experience of seeing, a family actually walk through college and do all this. I've literally done this, plenty of clients, and, been around long enough that their kids have gone through school. Real life example that I always use is we had this lady at 300,000, shifted it off radar. She was a widow. She got the money from life insurance. She was a widow. She was earning, 30, 40 on her own, had very, minimal other assets. We shifted this off radar, funded up a, short pay and a policy. Her son went to school. He went to Loyola Marymount. It was $28,000 a year. They got $22,000 a year with scholarship, tuition assistance, and aid because we were off radar. They ended up then just using the gains to cover the gains for 300,000 was 16K a year. So they just used the interest gain from the investment to pay for school as it went. He then continued for another 2 years. He went into accounting. We paid his room and board with the custom, just on the income from that, $1,200 a month for 2 straight years. He then stopped. We paused it. Now her daughter, Emily, is, about to go to school, and we're rinse and repeating the same process. If that money, by the way, in total, she has taken out in distributions over $200,000, and then the account has like 290 in it. Right. It's a workhorse. And when it's done, and when the next kid is done through school, she's going to use it for her retirement income. And then when she dies, her kids and family, because it was a survivorship, what have you, they're going to get $1 million.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Powerful.
But yeah, but people just walk into this, and the reason why this college planning is so lazy by so many advisors. Why, as an advisor, would I want to focus on college planning if I know that asset is all gone? Why would I want to help build for my business and my book of business, why would I want to build assets under management for an asset that I know as soon as that kid goes 18, that money is, 25%, 25%, 25%, 25%, and it's all gone. There's no, that's why it's always like the lowest on the list of like, well, retirement first and this first and that first. And then, college, only in case of emergency, especially if you figure too, they're trying to aim at an impossible target. If they're in a 529, they're in a no-win game. It's like, if I'm over and I, paid for all of school and I have money left in my 529, I'm going to get a 10% penalty in taxes if I try to pull it, or unless I want to go back to school. And then, the other of it, if I come in under, well, now I didn't fully cover school. Now my kid has an unbacked student loan that they owe on, and, I missed the mark. So this scenario is worlds of difference, and just make sure that you explain and really belabor the point here, because it's not a trickery of numbers. It's not a whatever. It's either you lose everything or you keep it. Or if you run it skinny, we at least pay for all of school, and everything's covered. Or here we come up short, and then you add your kid to the Rolodex of, people that have unbacked student loans that they can't afford. So yeah, it's a very, very, very important conversation. And it's one that what I love about it is you can have with anybody, like anybody that has kids. Anybody that has kids, you can explain this as an example, and run this for them. And it's pretty easy. I mean, obviously, right until you get up to this point is where the nuance is. Everything else is just a plug and play. Everything else is, here's the trends of college pricing, here's the inflation, here's the school, here's the student loan, here's the custom whole life, pay on the back end. Here's the FAFSA that explains where you should put the money, and here's, the scenario. This part is the part that requires the nuance.
Hey,
and
Andrew, I'm going to chime in and just, applaud this presentation. I mean, you get better every time, and you've dropped the mic on multiple occasions just in the last 25 minutes walking us through this. But in the interest of time and in the interest of your time, we're going to create ongoing curriculum around this, because we want everyone on the call and everyone in the organization to become fluent with this conversation. So I really want to thank you. I want to just let everyone know that if you've got a specific situation, Andrew is definitely open to helping out on those. So don't feel like you have to be the expert here. He's helped close a lot of cases in this topic. So with that being said, Andrew, thank you. Appreciate your leadership and appreciate you helping this group with a blockbuster idea in this topic of tax-free funding. Any final thoughts, Andrew, before we wrap up here?
Yeah, that's pretty much it. And like you said, we'll find a time to go into more detail and kind of role play on this, because this is everything. I mean, again, the rest is all doable, but yeah, it's a great opportunity to circle back. And again, part of why I was #1 in life premium in the office, the prior year, was because of strategies like this, shifting assets, moving things into this, into these kind of strategies, getting money off radar and all that. Like it's a fantastic thing. And it really, and the last point is it makes you so referable. Who could you not then, when you run through all of this, it's people are right, incredibly excited when you get to the end of this thing and it makes sense and all the rest of it. It's like, then it's the easiest follow-up in the world to say, who doesn't know this?
Who else?
Who doesn't know this? Who's running into a brick wall that they're, thinking that they've got it, figured out there. So yeah, it's very, very, very referable and great in any, any network. You can call and it's been a great in for super high net worth people, because I promise you their advisors are not doing this. I promise you, never remotely seen it, not once. So yeah, you can call your chicken list and what have you, and saving hundreds of thousands for school, and they all want their kids to go to the most expensive schools. So, you can, help them and help yourself in a pretty big way. But yeah, we'll follow up and we'll do a more detailed, conversation on maybe a training or something with this, because this is where the money is made and the challenge is too. So
great job. Hey, appreciate you and your leadership, Andrew. Stellar job. Thanks everybody for joining, and we'll get you the collateral on the topic and all of the follow-up items. We'll make sure that it gets sent out today. Let's have a great finish to the month. Thanks everybody. Take care.
All right. Thanks, guys.